or next thing that I would say is have enjoy, man. Just really enjoying everything of it, every single process, especially the process, right? Especially the beginning, especially the hardest parts, because this the celebration and when you get to the finish line and when you get to to reach your goal, it's going to be great. But I think what really creates the biggest growth is the process to get there.
That was Ahmed Muhumed today on the Running Effect podcast. Guys, I love this conversation. Ahmed, I say it at the start of this episode, but anyone who knows him loves him. He's got such a fun, joyful spirit, but he also has such depth and complexity that he brings to our conversation today. I won't keep this intro long because I'll just let you experience him and his story in full, but he was born and raised in Ethiopia, came from very humble beginnings and scaled his way up through the U.S. system in high school, winning back-to-back cross-country state titles. And then at his time as Boise State, crushed it. His time as a graduate student at Florida State, crushed it. And then in the year and a half, really fought to put himself in a position to get a pro running contract, which he ultimately did, as he now competes for Northern Arizona Elite that's sponsored by Hoka. So he's a Hoka sponsored athlete. This conversation was super inspiring to me. It's just really, really inspiring. I love his story. I think it's one of the best stories I've captured in recent months. And he just has such a fun, joyful spirit about him as he shares his words, his story. I know you guys are going to love this one. If you do, please share it with a friend or a family member or a teammate. Share it with everyone, guys. I would greatly appreciate that. If you enjoy the podcast, that's the easiest way you can help us out and help us expand our mission, grow our reach, the whole 9 yards. Also, hit the follow button and the subscribe button wherever you're listening so you never miss another episode. Hit the 5-star review button, and then I'm hoping it's not sold out, or maybe I am hoping it's sold out because that'd be a good sign. But at the time of recording this, it's not out, but it will be out by the time this podcast goes live. Merch will be released. First ever merch. We only made 200 pieces, super, super limited. So go in the first link in the show notes. We've made 2 different types of t-shirts, first ever Running Effect merch. And if you want to rep the brand, support us. And join and be a part of the tribe and community of people striving to be the best runner, be the best individual you can be. Go rep the community, the TRE, turn your what ifs into realities this year. Rep that logo on your chest. So check that out. First link in the show notes. With all those notes aside, I hope you all enjoy this conversation with the one and only, the man, the myth, the legend, Ahmed Muhumed. Ahmed Muhumed, welcome to the Running Effect podcast. A pleasure to be joined by you. Anyone who knows you loves you. Let me just state that. So it's a privilege having you on, man. You're a joy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
A lot of things, a lot of different avenues we can go into today, but let's start out talking about some of the background of your story and how you're giving back present day. You were born and raised in Ethiopia, if I'm not mistaken. And I know you and your wife just did a lot of things and continue to do a lot of things to give back to that community. And I think that's particularly cool because a lot of people who come from countries like that or come from international countries, they leave, they come to the States, and then they kind of never go back, never do anything with the community. So take me through what you're doing to give back and why that's still heavy on your heart to give back to that community you came from.
Yeah, so I'm from the Somali region of Ethiopia, and the Horn of Africa has 5 different regions where Somali people can be found, and that is not because they just immigrated and moved around. It's because the borders move around them. You know what I mean? And we had during colonial era, the UK, Italy, and Ethiopia taking different parts of it, as well as France. So you have Djibouti, the Somali region of Ethiopia, where I'm originally from. Somaliland, current day, an autonomous region, a country of its own, but not really recognized internationally. And then you've got the southern side of Somalia, which was formerly colonized by Italy. And then where my wife is from, which is the Somali region of Kenya. So there is a huge population of Somali people that I personally very much connect with, but we're all from different areas and different, I guess, countries, if you will. And so to be able to not only be married to my wife who's from one of the other regions, but also to be from one of those regions, it's a privilege for me to be able to somehow be involved and be able to give back, because the opportunities that I've been given where I'm at in life right now, I was fortunate, and so I want to hopefully expose more of that opportunity, I guess, in a way of through running in a way, back to where I come from, and try to maybe impact one or two youth into run, and potentially be showcasing their talents at world stage.
I think people in the US, so most people listening to this podcast are from the US. We definitely have a few outliers, but we don't realize how good we have it and how privileged we are and the things we take for granted on a daily basis. Can you paint the picture of some of the things you think Americans take for granted that you didn't have, and people in that community don't have?
Yeah. So it's funny because, if you divide my life into two, I lived half of it. The first half, which is probably the fundamental era of anybody's life, is those first 13, 15 years of life where, you're getting exposed to what life is and what this world is about. I got exposed to other different realities than, when I came to the States. And obviously it was a complete shock to be out here, and try to assimilate to the new society that, I became member of. But I would say there is a lot, and I think perspective is everything, right? Because when I was 10, 8, 9, growing up back home, in the Somali region of Ethiopia, I didn't think I was missing anything. You know what I mean? You don't know what you have until you lose it, and you don't know what you're missing until you have something, and you're like, oh wow. And I think that's one of the reasons why when you hear people talk about, a lot of people when they get success in their lives, they look back and they talk about the tough times and the hardships they gone through. But majority of the time we kind of embrace those hardships because that is all we know for that particular time of our lives. And so, to be honest, I had a great childhood. I had a lot of fun. We used to play soccer, and we would make, because we didn't have the soccer balls, we would take a pair of sock, and we'll take one sock, and we'll take the mattress foam, and put it in there so it gets a bit bouncy, and then we'll literally just make it rounded so that we have a soccer ball. But that was fun, right? And I think there was a lot of ways that we got creative into getting things that we didn't have, especially things that we seen on TV and things that we knew our counterparts in the Western world or elsewhere had. So I think it's perspective based. I think at any given point in my life, I just always felt privileged to be where I was. But looking at it now, 2023, I went back in Ethiopia, and when I was there, there were people, youth that I was running with, guys who committed to running as kind of their main thing, and they would really leave their homes and everything they know behind so that they could chase this dream of maybe someday making it in the running world. And some of those guys were running in the same pair of running shoes for a whole year, and you could see like the bottom of it coming off. And at that point, this is the time that I wasn't sponsored, and this is right before I joined Hoka. And at that point, I was in this transition, period where I wasn't getting the, Division One, athletic support, but I also wasn't getting a brand support. And so I thought I had it hard. And then I go there and I'm like, all right, I do not have it as hard as I thought, right? And so it's perspective, but there's a lot of privilege that we have here that we don't really recognize because we don't know what it is like to not have them. And then there's a lot of things that I guess maybe people back home where I come from don't realize they don't have because they don't have it, right? Like it's something that, so it's almost like that ignorant is blessed, that type of, statement, right? But I think opportunities is something that a lot of the youth back home lack. And that is something that we're hoping to maybe 1% change, right? I think at the end of the day, we can't change the whole world and we can't change my whole region, but we could impact maybe 1% of the youth, and that could hopefully come back and make the world a bit better.
When you look back on your years growing up, do you feel like presently and present day it gives you a little bit of a chip on your shoulder, just added motivation to make it big, to knock things out of the park, and to show that community where you came from of like, you guys can do it too, maybe a young boy watching you on the big stage winning races, like, hey, I can be like him too one day.
1000%. I had Mo Farah, for example, Muhammad Ahmed. Those are guys that whenever I watched Abdi Abdirahman, Abdi Bilal Abdi was really the role model when we were kids. We didn't know much about running, but we knew how impactful he was on the youth back in the 80s, when he won the first Somali, world championship title. But I would say Yes, because now I find myself in a position where not only do I have the opportunity to have that impact, but also I know there is young boys and girls who are looking up and saying, you know what, like if Ahmed can do it, so can I too. And I hope that is the case, and I would love to maybe impact them in many different ways, possibly provide them more opportunities. But yeah, definitely there is that chip for sure, and I think with that similar mindset is opportunity for me too, right? To be able to give back is also an opportunity. And so it's to make the most out of it while I can.
Going back to that version of yourself playing soccer with used socks and parts of a mattress, did you realize at that point of your journey in life that you had more endurance than the other kids, or at what point was it shown that, hey, maybe this like running, I'm outlasting other kids out here?
Yes, I was the fastest kid in the block until my uncle came. He was maybe I had an uncle who was like 4 or 5 years older than me, and he was really really fast. So as long as he's not around, I was the fastest kid, and then he would come in and I would kind of hide somewhere, right? Yeah, I've always been competitive, and I think. Especially when you're a kid just running after a soccer ball, and I was a midfielder. So like I was running to the goalie to our side and then trying to score on the other side. And so because of all that endurance and back and forth shuttles that I was doing, naturally I built that stamina for sure.
Take me through the official start in the sport. I know you moved to the US with your family in 2011. What was the first kind of like organized structure that you realized, oh, this running thing's a sport. It's not just a subset of soccer.
Yeah, I went out for we're in the PE class, and my PE teacher, Miss Macon, but this is a story that I will always tell because that's literally how my running started, and I'm so grateful for Miss Macomber, because I showed up to this PE class, eighth grade year, and I'm wearing shorts, and had no idea what to kind of expect. And my parents got me a pair of this like very thick pair of shoes from Goodwill, right? And I have no idea what brand it was, so don't ask me that. But like it was pretty heavy. I do remember that. And there's a photo of it that I have
They're the
somewhere.
Bondies,
Could
Bondi
have been.
ones.
Yeah, could have been. They were really, really thick and heavy. And we did the pacer test, and I did really well. And right after the class, Miss Maycomer pulls me to a side, and she's like, "Hey, Ahmed, I really think you should go out for the track team." And then eventually, I kept saying no until we did a mile, and I did 5:20 in the mile. And she was like, "Ahmed, you really need to go out for the track team." So I decided
What
to do.
age?
This is 13. So I know I was 14.
Okay.
This is eighth grade year. So, but that was my first year running. I've never done any running. So I ran 5:20, and she really kept trying to persuade me. But then at one point I was like, I'll do both track and soccer. So I would have track practice, and then right after I'll go to the soccer practice. And I did both, but eventually, because when you go to high school, the fee is so expensive, the sport fee. At least at the school I went to, it was I think $150. Miss Makenborough was like, "Hey, if you go out for the cross country team," because it was between soccer and cross country, she's like, "If you go out for the cross country team, I can support you with the athletic fee." And so that semester, she actually helped me pay for it, and that was probably the best decision I've ever made in my life, because running has changed my life in so many ways, man, so many ways.
Double threshold is all the rage these days in the pro running world. I'm not sure if Jack has you on it, but from what you know, double threshold, which is harder, double threshold or the track practice right into soccer practice?
Um,
I'm messing with
oh,
you.
that is, yeah, no, that is, I would
Was it
say,
hard though back in the day? Were you like just you came home and you were like gassed
well, I
from
was
the two
tired.
practices? Yeah.
Yeah, and I had to walk a mile and a half home majority of the time, because after practice there was no bus, and at that point my family and we didn't have a car. So I would walk like in the evening, like maybe 5:30, 6 p.m. I would walk a mile and a half home after having a soccer practice and the track practice. The double threshold is a lot harder now, just because the volume, right? At that point, back when I was, in eighth grade, I was just having fun. I was just running, right? Like I was just running. I was just playing soccer, and it was still fun. Obviously, very tiring, but a lot of fun. It's still fun here too, but it's just a little bit more volume for sure.
Different beast. On those mile and a half walks home, during the evenings post those two practices, what what was going through your mind, if you can recall? What were you thinking during those
Yeah,
walks?
that's deep. That's deep. I've actually, for the first time, maybe ever, I reflected on that a little bit like a couple weeks ago, because if you really think about it, both my parents, they've worked hard all their lives and always made sure to provide as much as they can. But at one point, not having a car because we were so new to the states and we was trying to figure things out at that point. Um, they kind of thought a bit it was hard, and so they would tell me, hey, like, instead of waiting to go to another practice just right after track, catch the after school buses and come home early, because they were a bit concerned too. We're in Portland at that point, and we're still new and really not fully assimilated, so they were concerned for me. And I do remember just really, I think the moments I had walking by myself, it was like almost kind of like a reflected moment for me, and I think it helped me grow more as an individual, right? Like realizing what's really important to me. Even though I was a kid, I think the more time you have with your mind freely, the more growth you can experience if you allow it. So a lot of the things that came to my mind mostly was, well, get home safely. That was number one. And
Hmm.
then two, I think it was just really thinking how I can get better in everything I was doing. And I, just because now I am in a completely different environment, and being good at things was going to be critical in being able to get more opportunities and kind of propel forward.
To what extent do you think that alone time, most days of the week walking home, allowed your mind to kind of ruminate's not the right word, but think about and dream about like being great and being great at something one day? And was there a specific point you can point to during your high school years where you first had the thought of like, how can I be the best at soccer? How can I be the best at running?
Yeah, it's funny because I've always been so confident, like at everything I've done. Even though, so here's the funny story. When I was fourth grade, there were maybe 55 students in my class, and I ended up finishing ranked 37th. My older brother was ranked second or third at that in that year, right? So it's not because I wasn't smart. It was just because I had other priorities. I really the soccer at that point was the main thing. And so right after school, we finished school. I go home, I drop my backpack, and I go straight outside to go play soccer for like 3, 4, 5 hours. And so I was kind of like really just like vibing. I was still having a lot of fun. As a kid. But I think I always had that confidence that when I even got that result for being 37th place out of a 55 class, I it didn't bother me at all, because I knew I was like, in terms of intelligence and working hard, I knew if I put my heart and soul into it, I knew I could have been top 5, top 10 possibly, no problem, right? So it never bothered me, but I had such a huge confidence in my abilities to do things that I think over time it I just created this self belief about myself that I was gonna make it someday. And I think there was, people would say, manifesting, but I remember my freshman year, I was getting catching rides with a friend of mine, Abdul Ahmed, who was a junior at the time I was freshman, and he was a runner as well. And there's a photo of him and I running together my freshman year. But Abdul was a Somali, he was from a Somali family nearby, and I remember specifically thinking, this is the first semester I've really committed to running. I manifested. I literally had an image one time in my head where it was like years and years down the road, and I visited him and his family as the pro athlete. Funny story. They moved from Oregon and they go to Texas. And I had a long connecting flight from Flagstaff back to Tallahassee when I was getting recruited by NAZLE. And because they're in Dallas, he picks me up and I go walk into the house and they're like, oh, there's the professional runner. And I'm not even
Wow.
kidding. I am not even kidding you, dude. That's literally this was 2013, like around September, October in the fall. And literally like 2022, I go there and same exact thing happened, and I'm like, holy cow. So it's because I had that self-belief, right? And so I've always had that self-belief. I've always believed that I could make it big somewhere, but obviously we're still working, and I still have that self-belief for bigger things.
Yeah, the law of attraction is so powerful. I love
Holy cow. Yeah.
listening to those sort of things, reading into those sort of things. I think as human beings, like you get what you deserve, but you can expand what you deserve by how you think and then how you act underneath how you think. And what I always tell people is like, why not think bigger? What's the worst
Yeah.
that can happen?
Yes.
Right?
It
You're
is.
in the same position right now. Think as
Yeah.
big and think in grand detail. Like you know, even for me, I think about in grand detail, like what I want my future house to look like, what cars I
Mhm,
want to drive, like,
mhm, mhm.
um, also more important things. What are my relationships like with my parents, with my family? Am I loved? All those sort of things. And I think then you take the actions underneath that that aligns yourself with those things, and that's how you actually make those things come true. But people, I
Absolutely.
think, just think they're going to be successful by sitting on their butt at home,
No.
and
Oh
it's like,
yeah.
that doesn't happen. That you're
No,
not going to win the lottery,
now, I will tell you, I do believe in hard work, and this is a discussion that actually my teammates and I've had in the last couple of weeks a lot. I do believe in hard work. I do believe in showing up, 100% of the time. But I also think fortune plays role into it a little bit too, right? Like being fortunate enough to, because I was in Ethiopia, a month and a half ago, and I saw, a kid that was like 10 years old, and he runs up to me and he wants to clean my shoes, and I'm thinking, you know, that kid is working hard at the age of 10. Could have been me, right? And the opportunity of him getting out of that door is so limited, right? So limited, and no matter how hard he works, there is always going to be some level of limitation, depending on obviously where he comes from and who he is, and the people that he's around and the opportunities he has in life. And so I believe in hard work 100%, and I always work hard, but I also think that there is people that are very fortunate, and I think the privilege that comes with being able to dream is something that I think a lot of people take for granted. If
hmm
you can dream, you can do it.
Totally. I think
Yeah.
that's such a good point. And it goes back to the start of this conversation and me kind of acknowledging how privileged Americans are. We don't, I think, often reflect on how well we have it compared to the rest of the world. Obviously, I'm biased being an American here, but I truly think we have the greatest country in the world. And
Absolutely.
if you're listening to this podcast, I can just assume some basic things about you. You either have a computer or phone. I can assume some other things off of that, and it's like,
Connected to
yeah,
the
you
world.
you can you can work really hard and make things happen. And I think for me, I'm a believer and Christian, and there's people will frequently pray for things, but the saying I have is like, pray big prayers but back it up with action, right? You can pray the biggest
100%.
prayers, you can pray that you win gold in LA 2028, but guess what, if you sit on your couch the next 3 years
Not
leading into the
gonna
trials, like you're not going
happen.
to perform well at the trials. So you got
Nope.
to pray those big prayers, believe those big prayers, but then back up those prayers with action, and
Yes.
that's where I believe God comes in and blesses that work. And you can't they're not exclusive with each other. Like if you're working hard but you have no direction or you have no dreams, that work is going to be channeled in the wrong places. So
100%. 100%.
for you
100%.
in your running journey, when did you feel like it really took off? You've talked about those early upbringings and soccer and track, and at what point did you focus fully on running? And take me through some of the progression to ultimately, when I think you won back-to-back state cross country titles, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the state of Oregon, yes. And it's funny because, running started off as something that, I was good at. And especially in an unfamiliar territory and, a country that, I was just really learning to assimilate to, learning the language, learning the culture and the customs and the norms. I think as soon as I got good at running, especially when we did those pacer tests, I had, the cool kids from the middle school coming trying to take photos with me. And I think in a way that kind of solidified my presence in the society, and so it really took off some of that stress from trying to fit in, right? Because at that point now I'm part of the cool kids, right, in a way, right? And I obviously made sure that I used my privilege of being kind of recognized around the school to maybe help the kids that aren't at the cool kid tables, you know what I mean, and eventually elevate them as well into becoming more confident and and being accepted more. But I think that's what it started off. It started off as something that I was kind of good at, and something that allowed me to socialize and to fit in. But then eventually it really created more purpose. I think the biggest purpose for me at that point was coming here as a refugee and trying to really assimilate to society and realizing what my potential is. Running solidified what hard work can do. You work hard and you run fast. You work hard and you win state titles. You get injured or you don't work as hard or you're not as recovered and you don't see the results that you maybe are capable of. And so for me, it got a lot greater and bigger than just fitting into the society. It became a purpose to say, hey, I want to see I want to work hard and build consistency and see what that brings me back. And then I would say, yeah, after winning 2 state championships, that was cross country. I got full ride scholarship to run at Boise State University, and I think around that time, there was a run I had with Emily Venter as one of the mornings. Actually, she was my teammate back then, and I remember like it was one Wednesday morning we were running, and she was like, "Ahmed, like, do you dream of becoming a professional athlete at some point in the future?" And I was like, yeah, I think that would be cool. But like that was the first like beginning of like an idea of a professional running. But then like the next 2 years, I got challenged with some injuries, minor injuries that just kind of set me off, set me back. And eventually, I think when I was transferring after COVID hit, when I was transferring from Boise State to Florida State, it was mainly so I could get my graduate, degree, and kind of not have to pay for it, right? And I remember telling Coach Bremen about it. I was like, "Hey, man, like I'm gonna show up 100% and always gonna work hard," but I really did not see a pro running in my future at that point, just because of what my times were and my performance at that up to that point. I never made it to nationals. I made it to regionals, but really never made it out out of there to go farther. And I think I ran 13:56 in the 5K or 57, which is good, but like really doesn't at that point wasn't, because I think it might have been maybe top 40 in the region, like West region. And so because of how fast everybody else was running, I thought, oh, maybe just go get my degree and dip out and go into the careers that I wanted to look into. But then my running kind of started taking off a little bit at Florida State. I just started getting a little more consistent. Started becoming a little bit more mature about my running and taking care of those little things. And I remember 2021 we went to Ethiopia for an altitude training with 6 of my friends. I took them back to where I came from, and all we did was eat, run, and sleep. And I was like, wow, that was the first time I actually ever dedicated a real time to running, because the whole summers I would work, right, and try to balance work and running. But this time it was just all about running for 2 months. And I came back and finished 20th at NCAA Cross, and that was kind of the start of something. Oh wow, I actually worked hard and I can see it go even farther. Made two more national teams, but even right out of college, I wasn't, I guess, at a place to get a sponsorship right off the bat. And so I had to go another year and a half of just really trying to navigate through that. I think for me, there were a couple of times where I got that roller coaster at Florida State where it was like, oh, I can make it in pro scene and get a contract, and then it was like, nope, not today. And then it's like, yeah, let's do it again. And then I was pretty close to walking away from my aspirations for professional running, I think around end of November 2022. And then 2023 January, I actually decided to go to Ethiopia and go do 2 months of altitude training in January and February. Came back, ran decent, had a couple good races, and then I had probably the worst race, which was at 13:32 maybe, or 33. I never looked back at the results. And at that point, I remember like the home stretch, I hear the announcement saying, "Oh, here comes the high schooler. He's about to break the national record." And I'm like, "Oh God, like this is not happening." And so I ended up finishing right in front of him. But eventually, what I realized was I I needed to just go all in. And so I moved to Flagstaff, and I think training with Nora and Woody, that was kind of the first time I was like, oh, I definitely can do it. Even though they were working really hard, and they were really fit at that point, and they were messing me up in a lot of those sessions. But I ended up believing more and realizing, wow, there is more potential. And here we are at the pro scene right
Love
now.
it, man. Congrats, first of
Thank
all,
you,
for making
thank
it.
you,
That
thank
is
you.
a result of you believing in yourself through that period. You mentioned a year and a half roughly of no support out of college, keeping the dream alive quite literally. What was your mindset in that period? And that's something a lot of people give up. Obviously, we'll get into this in a second. You ended up winning. I think you've won 2 national titles at this point. There are probably a lot of people out there who could have won national titles, but they gave up right before they were about to make it. You didn't do that. You kept faith, you maintained belief. How were you able to do that during that year and a half?
I think that self belief as well as stubbornness, right? I think I think it's pretty easy to walk away from something that is meaningful to you. It's pretty easy if it obviously carries more work, or it requires more commitment and a lot more, I guess, mental strain to maintain it. There was a time when I was working with the Florida State cross country and track team, and working with a nonprofit organization, working pretty close to, I would say, 60, 70 hours a week of work. And just so that I could maintain that lifestyle, right? I remember the race I went to LA. I talk about this a lot because I remember specifically I spent, I think, like $1,200 just to be part of that race. And that is the race that I ended up, almost getting outkicked by the high schooler that was breaking the national record. And I'm thinking, wow, like, because I'm out here in LA, and, getting a rental car, covering all these things, and a hotel in LA, all those things. And eventually what I realized was, um, at that point I was a bit too deep in, right? Like, I've invested too much of self-belief and too much of my, I guess you could say, finance, as well as commitment, that I couldn't go back. But I would say even the beginning stages of that, I think I just had really great amount of support. I had great people around me, people who believed in me, friends of mine who would text me constantly and say, "Hey, you're gonna make it one day. We know you're gonna get a contract." Because I think what the whole thing for the need for a contract at that point for me was so that I could start getting rested, right? Start focusing on just solely on running instead of trying to balance all these different other responsibilities. But I would say my stubbornness as well as self belief really kept me in it. And every now and then when there was pretty close, I was close to just walking away. Something was just telling me, "You're so close. You're just like so close. Just push through." And I think the one time that I did the most for that specifically to work was when I basically picked all the eggs and said in one basket, and I said, "I'm all in," right? And that was when I moved to Flagstaff. I quit my job, not with the nonprofit organization, and moved up to Flag, and was living off of my saving, like literally of everything I had for the next 2 months, just so I could hopefully get a contract in. Fortunately, those 2 months were great enough to get me a Hoka contract that has been life changing for me.
What would you say to someone in the audience who feels inspired by you and your decision to go all in, and they've had one foot in the water, one foot out for the past few years, but they know that if they go all in, it's make or break, as it always is with going all in. But the benefit of it is if you do it, you won't live with the regret and think, what would have
100%.
happened if I did go all in? So speak to an audience member out there who's thinking maybe for the first time about going all in because of what you just said.
Yeah, I remember my coach, Brayman, one time told me a story of him and a couple of his buddies from college who wanted to climb some mountain right after college, and they never did. And then they kind of reunited in their early 60s, late 50s. And he's talking about, they were talking about how they were sitting down and talking, and they're like, "Hey, y'all remember when we decided we were gonna climb that mountain?" And he told me how like a bunch of them had like hip surgeries and like back problems, and obviously we're getting older, right? And could not at this point physically possible, it wouldn't be possible for them to do what they thought that they wanted to do, I guess, when they were in their 20s. And I remember him specifically saying, "Ahmed, you," because I kept talking about work, right? And I think there is also another chip on my shoulder at that point there was, where I had other people that I wanted to look out for, like my family, my parents. Both my parents left everything they know so that they can give me and my siblings the opportunity that we ended up having. And so there was other pressures outside that I was putting on myself, even though my parents were so supportive of my journey in running. And my coach was like, "Ahmed, you could work for the rest of your life, but you will not be able to run at the level you're running at for the rest of your life." And that is coming from him. He was an elite athlete himself at some point, right? And so that's when I realized, I was like, yeah, if in 10, 15, 20, 30 years time, if I look back, will I say I didn't do what I could have done? I didn't do all that I could have done. Or will I say I've done everything I could? And that was, I think, my move to Flagstaff in June of 2023 was, I am going to go all in this next 2 months, use my savings account and go through it. And by the end of those 2 months, if I don't have a contract and I do walk away from it, at least I know I gave it 100%. And then guess what? No regrets. And honestly, regret is, what do they say? Something about stealing joy, or like thief of joy. Is that what it was? it really does affect life later on. And so that's something I don't want to have in my life, and I never want to have in my life. And so to this day, I have other goals now, right? Like now I know I'm no longer saying I want a contract. I'm saying I want to win this and I want to win that. And I'm doing the things that could get me to do those things, accomplish those goals. So to anybody listening to this, like while you can do it and realize that the ability to even set a goal and to dream is a privilege in this world. Because here's a crazy fact that I heard, in one of my classes, because I'm international affairs and world, major, studies major. And one of our professors told me how 73% of the world population will go uh, without breakfast, not by choice, but because they can't afford it. It's not within their budget. And so I think to dream is a privilege. To be able to do something is a privilege. So I hope somebody gets up right now and gets going, man, and do
I
something
love it.
that
Let's
can
go,
extend.
baby. Let's
Yeah,
go.
let's
Let's
do
run through some brick walls, people.
it. Let's do it. Let's
Ahmed
do
with the
it.
inspo.
Mm.
So, bridging the gap, the Hoka conversation starts. You tour the team, you decide that's the move, they offer you a contract. What was the emotion when you put pen to paper and you realized this dream of becoming a professional runner? And bridge the gap between Ahmed at the beginning of this conversation, kicking around a made up soccer ball, to Ahmed in the US signing a professional contract with debatably the biggest up and coming running brand in the world.
Oh man, it's crazy because I think I kind of lack the ability to celebrate too hard on anything, right? Because at some point, I just realized like you work hard and you get what you deserve. But the running thing was huge for me. Being able to have a contract was huge for me because it solidified the belief I had in myself to say, oh yeah, you can make it. That like it's almost like they talk about like the inner child, like the really I guess in a way providing this you know energy and positive energy and excitement to fuel up some childhood dreams or goals that anybody had. I got stoked. I was really excited to be able to just say, you know what, we're on board. Let's do it. I would say it really solidified my self belief. But then on the top of that, I had this imposter syndrome for a year and a half, and honestly, pretty much like majority of through college, right, where I believed in myself, but there were times when I was questioning, if I belong at the front, if I belong in this race, if I belong. And each race that I performed well was solidifying that small bit by bit. But the contract itself solidified, like there is a whole brand that believes in you and says, hey, if you represent us, we'll pay you, but then also we believe in you because that's why we want to get you on our team. And so yeah, I think right after joining the team, my imposter syndrome, majority of it got out of the door. I think one of the reasons why my performance has been increasing tremendously is because I no longer race with fear. I race with an opportunity, right? I race with the idea of seeking an opportunity to reach my full potential. And I have all the support. I have great coaches. I have great teammates, people who are pushing me to see the best version of myself. I have great family, and I have a great brand that gives me everything that I need to succeed. So yeah, it's been great, man.
Take me through the current mindset of yourself going into 2025. What are some things you want to accomplish? What are the things you're dreaming about? We talked about the high school version of yourself, those dreams. What are you currently dreaming about? What are you striving for? What are you chasing after?
This year, I want to make three teams. I want to make the road team a road team, and I want to make the track team, and I want to make the cross country team. But the biggest goal for me is the cross country for sure. I think that I would take out of the three. It being hosted in Tallahassee, Florida, my home course, a course that my coach takes huge pride in. My college coach, because he's the one that actually there's a photos of him with like machete where he's like cutting all these like a lot of like branches and stuff, and it's such it would be a cool experience, and I think probably would be the last time I might be racing cross country. So those are the three big goals. I want to run some fast times, and I just want to I really the biggest goal for me is to elevate my competing styles, right, and to no longer be the guy that is seen towards the end of the race. I want to be the guy that is seen at the end of the race. And what that means for me is not accepting third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and like I've done in the past. Just really being a factor in every race I'm in, and making bold moves, and having fun and entertaining people, and let's do it, man.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. For those who have listened to our conversation today, one final serious question for you. What would be the final takeaway message that you want to leave with the audience? People finishing up their run, they enjoyed it, enjoyed the story. They're feeling inspired. They're feeling the wisdom of Ahmed, about to take out their AirPods, go back into their real life. What would be the final words you want to give people?
I would say, one, make sure you're enjoying everything you do. Make sure you do with joy, and I think you get to do, you do it with the mindset of get to rather than have to, right? If you have to do anything, unless it's bringing you money, maybe don't do it, right? Like, do it because you get to do it. Do it as if it is an opportunity for you to see a better version of yourself after that, right? And I think with that is what I basically mean is having gratitude, not taking a single day for granted. And what that does sometimes is it really elevates your mindset to say, you know what, tomorrow is not guaranteed for me, so I'm gonna make the most out of today. And that doesn't necessarily mean go to the extremes every day. I don't believe in that. I think that's where I would go with my next advice, or next thing that I would say is having joy, man. Just really enjoying everything of it. Every single process, especially the process, right? Especially the beginning, especially the hardest parts, because the celebration, and when you get to the finish line, and when you get to to reach your goal, it's going to be great. But I think what really creates the biggest growth is the process to get there. But yeah, have fun out there. Just enjoy life. I think there is a lot of negativity out in the air nowadays, and especially with social media and things like that. And I think we can all control the energy we give out, as well as the energy we receive. And enjoying life is always critical, important, the most important thing, really.
He's a wise man. Go write a book, man. What are you doing on this podcast? Go write that book, Ahmed. It's good. Such good stuff. Appreciate this conversation a ton. Final question for you. The question I ask every single guest on every single podcast. If you had Gordon Ramsay coming over to your house for dinner, what would you choose to make for him?
Ooh, see, it's crazy because I've become such a good cook from August 2017 when I moved. Honestly, I used to cook even at a young age, but I do make a lot of different types of pastas. It's crazy because I never follow a recipe or any specific, like I don't use a book, nothing. I've never done that. I always just mix up random stuff, and it works out and it tastes good, and eventually I kind of get it down, and get it to a detail. I would probably make um I would probably make Somali injera, which is basically like a Somali bread, and maybe make some soup for it that you could eat with. That would be something that I could do, maybe. But I would probably make a pasta dish too, man. I love pasta. Like I made probably 50, 100 different pasta dishes in my life, and it would probably be one of them. I think it would be, yeah, it'd be like a soma. I have this pasta that I usually make that has, like, it's like Italian, American, Somali, all three kind of influences, and it has like all types of like recipes from those three different things. Yeah, so I'd probably make that with spaghetti, probably.
Ahmed, thank you so much for the conversation, man. Blessing me with your story, with your words. Really looking forward to seeing the impact this one creates. And I have no doubt you gained a couple extra thousand fans today. It's hard not to listen to your words and your story and be a fan. So go
Oh
make
man,
those 3 teams this year, and let's recap it all on the podcast when it all happens.
all righty. I really appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me.